Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Muchaneta to Napel, and I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation on COP30. Thank you so much, Future Fabrics Expo, for inviting me back on stage. And I'm super excited because we are going to not shy away from the hard problems today, aren't we, ladies? So today the conversation, as you know, is going to be focusing on COP30. How can the fashion industry be a climate solution? It's quite a bold question. I don't think there's one particular answer. So hopefully what we're going to be discussing here is how can we make fashion a genuine force for global good, especially as the world is preparing for COP30. Joining us today, I'd love to introduce my panel. We have Malini, and she is a policy expert, and she tirelessly advocates for embedding climate justice in global governance. We have Abbie, who I've known for a number of years. She's a change maker in sustainability data and pushes for accountability within the fashion industry. We've got Amy. She's a pioneering designer and a creative force behind circular fashion's new wave. Last but not least, we've got Stephanie, and she's an innovator driving sustainable material solutions in an increasingly complex global landscape. So we're going to start, and I'm going to start with you, if that's all right. The UK's breakthrough agenda is ambitious blueprint. I'm sure we all agree on that. Yet fashion remains strikingly absent. So as we approach COP30, what concrete steps can governments take, especially here in the UK, to ensure that fashion is finally recognised as central to the climate agenda? It's a big question.
It is, and it's very specific. But I'd like to start with something quite general, and really that is to welcome everybody to London Climate Action Week. Can I just see a show of hands? For whom is this your very first LCOR? Okay, some newbies, but I guess that this is not your first London Climate Action Week, and certainly not your first Future Fabrics Expo, because FFE has been here for more than 10 years, but FFE is one of our flagships for the last 3 years. So I'm one of the organizers for London Climate Action Week, and this year, for the first time, we actually have a fashion hub. And the reason that we do is because we wanted to recognize the amazing work which is being done across the fashion industry in London and beyond, but which isn't really seen by other sectors of the economy who are working on a transition timelines, decarbonisation. So in answer to your question, that's the first thing that we can do, is to make much more visible the change that's actually happening, because time is our worst enemy. We have to accelerate what we're doing, and that is helped by us coming together and seeing what's happening. So across this week, you will see billboards, you'll see screens in Piccadilly Circus, across Westfield, which have a slogan. Our narrative is, don't tell me climate change is not happening, don't tell me climate action isn't happening, because there's a lot going on. You mentioned the UK and the breakthrough agenda. So at COP26 in 2021, the UK hosted the COP26 up in Glasgow. And one of the UK's key contributions to creating a new platform for business and the government, civil society and others to come together was the breakthrough agenda. And the breakthrough agenda basically meant that in order for business to make that climate breakthrough, it needed to work in partnership across its industry and with other partners. And so initially there were 7 sectors for that breakthrough agenda. And those were the most highly carbon, very carbon intensive industrial sectors that needed the quickest attention from policymakers. So I'll just list them. They won't be a surprise to you, but they are power, road transport, buildings, hydrogen, cement, steel, agriculture. Fashion is not on the agenda. So that's why with this year, we thought we want to put fashion on the agenda, because of course it's there in terms of the industrial transition, especially when you're looking at energy, because one of the biggest ways you ask for solutions, one of the biggest ways that you can address this issue is by linking it to the commitments that have already been made under the UNFCCC, under the Paris Agreement. So 2 years ago, the world came together at COP28 in Dubai and agreed on 3 things. The first is in terms of the energy transition, which is absolutely at the core of what we're talking about. The first was to triple renewable energy globally by 2030. And that is huge. It means for all of those SMEs who are in these long fashion supply chains, whether you are in Vietnam or you're in Bangladesh, you are part of a renewable energy system nationally. That's not the case right now, which is why we've got so much embedded carbon. The second thing was to increase energy efficiency to double it, right? So that is the hidden renewable energy, right? The third one was to make sure that we are actually working across the piece and linking it to our national determined contributions. So this year, every government in the world who signed up to the Paris Agreement, that's 198 countries, has to produce a new, more ambitious climate plan. It's called the Nationally Determined Contribution. They were supposed to be submitted in February. They were only 22. The UK was one of those, and the UK for the first time included a non-traditional sector, food systems, and it's committed itself to including fashion and textiles as part of its national climate plan by 2035, 2032. Beginning 2032, so the BFC, British Fashion Council, you'll see that they've committed themselves to having a circular fashion ecosystem by 2032. And the UK has committed itself to having it fully integrated by 2035. So those are some of the things that can be done.
Okay, so what you're basically saying, which kind of stood out for me, was that you mentioned that only 22, right? How can we communicate globally in a way that gets people more involved? Because I feel like you got a wealth of knowledge, but not everyone is aware of that kind of information. So how can we ensure that the information is available to as many people as we can get?
So that's the rationale behind London Climate Action Week, and that's the rationale behind having these kind of events, which tend to speak to just its community. But actually, with London Climate Action Week, we are connecting across the different sections, right? So we've got finance. We've encouraged people who are investors, financiers, who would traditionally invest in maybe water management programs, energy-intensive industries, to come here and speak with you. So it's to cross-fertilize ideas and, most importantly, finance and investment between the industries to make this much more public. So, like I mentioned, we have a fashion hub. We have scores of fashion-related initiatives and events taking place across London Climate Action Week this year. Just look at the website. So the seminars taking place today are part of around 20 to 30, which are taking place across the city. Today, our flagship, and I'll just end on this, we're launching this evening an exhibition from Amazonia called Reweaving Amazonia. And this is part of the Brazilian host government's efforts to create the fashion of tomorrow. So this is the first Brazilian sustainable fashion exhibition, and it's here. And our teams in Rio, Sao Paulo, in Belém are reporting from London to the Brazilian population, but also across the world, about how sustainable fashion is being profiled, exhibited, loved, followed across the world. That's how we're communicating in a very different way this year.
I mean, I think that's very strongly put. It's really important that we have that communication, that we have that connection with other industries and maybe even learn from them. But I'd love to move to you, Abbie, next. The industry, as most of us know, has been awash with voluntary pledges. I mean, we're swimming in them. So, but with that reliable data and ambition, how do you feel this shift from promises to prove can actually happen? And what kind of framework can we use and kind of tools we can enforce?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very hot topic. And I think that there's also a lot of change going on within this space. If you were to literally ask me this question 3 to 5 weeks ago, I would have given a really different answer. I think today, anyone who is looking to communicate their sustainability agenda, the specific claims on any of these types of materials or anything outside of this room, really focus on consumer protection law and looking at the interpretation in the local markets that you operate as a fundamental baseline. We saw that a group of consumer protection authorities came together, there was about 70 of them, and actually wrote an open letter to the fashion industry to assess their green claims in line with consumer protection law. The reason why that's really important is because we're seeing a massive increase and step up in enforcement action. But obviously all of this is voluntary. It's voluntary to make an environmental claim. It's not a mandatory claim that you need to make. And I really think that the reality is in this particular market, it's all around focus. There isn't going to be a key market that sticks their head above the parapet and demand mandatory green claims. We've just seen a very likely scenario of the Green Claims Directive in Europe rolling back, Italy coming out and saying that unless you exempt SMEs, micro businesses, that will wipe out 95% of the companies that need to comply with that. And it also doesn't level the playing field, which was part of what the Green Claims Directive was meant to do. So it is pretty likely at this point that we're going to be in a market where the EU has provided guidance on what not to do, but not a lot of data on how to get it right.
Yeah.
And that means for SMEs or just in general, it's very hard for the market to then set out a path to communicate confidently. I think the main thing that any business can do in this time is focus on what data do I have and are the claims that I'm making proportionate. And I think this is why it's so important to have your green claims verified, because you as a business might be doing 101 different things. You think that you've got some data, or you think that a supplier has sent you the right information, but what is needed for consumer protection or is quite specific and very focused on proportionality. And I think that that's only really where you can get that conversation right in these times. There's no sugarcoating it. The market has shifted. And I think it's around, if we want to get accountability right, we need to just focus on what I can control as a business leader or a person who's executing sustainability in relation to the current regulatory environment that we know is not going anywhere. Consumer protection has a very high enforcement rate in Europe. So we know that that will be pursued. And we've seen that in multiple different eras, not just the one that we're in now. So I think that that is true. And I think the only other thing I would say on it is that we will see fragmentation. So I would say really, really focus on the differences in interpretation in different markets. Because, for example, the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, they will have powers to fine 10% of global turnover. And I think what we see is, while there is standardization in the way that consumer protection authorities are pursuing this, we are seeing slight differences in interpretation in local markets, and that could be due to different levels of capacity inside consumer protection authorities to know and understand about the climate in general. But I think right now, if everybody wants to kind of make sure that they are pursuing a very strong, transparent agenda, that's really the state of play that we're in, unfortunately.
Do you know what? I'm curious because you said something that's quite interesting. I want to ask the audience first. How many of you think that we should make it voluntary? How many of you think we should make it mandatory? So that's what kind of surprises me a lot, is that we're at a situation where time is of the essence, but yet we're giving them an option. And I kind of don't understand that. And I always use the example, like here in the UK, we have to pay for our plastic bag when you're going to Sainsbury's. But could you imagine if they said to us, you don't have to pay for it. You make a choice. You can either pay for that plastic bag or you can just take it. The chances are most of us will just take it, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, for sure. I mean, for many, many years, I've always thought that this should be mandatory. And obviously, there are local markets that are pursuing a bit more of a mandatory approach, like France, for example. But I think what I find interesting about this time is I don't know how long that agenda will last, given that we're moving into a bit more of a protectionist era. You know, we just saw in France the fast fashion, ultra fast fashion legislation come through, but when we see that come through, a lot of it is the rapporteur on that was actually citing a bit more of a protectionist agenda rather than an environmental one. And so I think that the reality is that this agenda has slipped down the agenda list. It just has. You know, when you're having to bulk up coffers for defence, we then have to individually, unfortunately, again, dig deep and step up accountability ourselves in order to get this done. I don't think it's going to come easily from governments to support it at this time.
Which is a shame, because I do think the government has a big role to play in compliance. But I would like to speak to you, Amy, next, if you don't mind. We often hear that circular designs holds the key to sustainable fashion, but how do we make it reality, especially in a system that's still driven by volume and speed?
Firstly, I've lost my voice, so hopefully everyone can hear me. I mean, the way I like to approach the circularity is I think the kind of overarching narrative is always just resale, and people think that's what circularity is. And I like to think it in a much more holistic way, and each area of your business essentially is like a mini circuit. So how are you growing your fibers? We're in a room full of fiber innovation, and is that a regenerative circular approach? Or, for instance, are you cutting down trees to make cellulose fibers? Are you replanting them, etc.? Then it goes to the factory. How's the factory managing their circularity policies? Are they using renewable energies? What's their wastewater? How are they kind of managing the chemicals and the dyes, etc.? And what chemicals and dyes are you using, etc.? Then you get into the office, how you manage your office. Are you doing renewable energies in your office, etc.? And you just look at each single area of your business. And I sort of always liken it to this necklace visual with links in the chain, and that each one interconnects with each one, and you have to look at each area as its own individual link, and that they all link together and create this kind of full circle, and that one focus is kind of not really the way to look at your business. I feel like it should be a very holistic approach to all of those links, and it's all about progress, not perfection, right? So how many of those links can you work on? So for instance, we're using only certified regenerative fibers, so we only use natural fibers. But, you know, to get our factories, for instance, to comply on circularity, we're not at scale enough to put the pressure on them to make them do it. I can't enforce my factory to have renewable energy because they just say, well, you've got tiny quantities, go away unless you want to pay for yourself, you know? So then it's kind of like, what can you do now? Like, deconstruct it, like, break it down, look at your whole business model. What are you doing? What could you be doing? How does it operate? How does it work? Which parts of those kind of mini links can you work on now? What could you work on in, 2 to 3 years' time? What could you work on next year? What's your long-term goal? And kind of one foot at a time. Because sometimes I think for most people it feels just so overwhelming.
That's it.
And I mean, we feel like that in life, right? We see big things in front of us and we don't know how to deal. And I think that is the case very much for sustainability. In life, as consumers, as brand owners, we don't really know how to tackle what feels so huge. But actually, I think one foot in front of another, look at each one of those links in your business and try and see as many as you can and have kind of, the overall vision to get this kind of perfectly made necklace at the end of it. But one step at a time.
I mean, to be quite honest, Amy, I'm going to repeat what you said for those who might not have heard her.
Sorry.
In the sense of, no, and I'm just going to repeat because I think it's quite strong when you said it's not about perfection, it's about progression.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy, especially in the fashion industry, to seek perfection, to be afraid to show what it is that you're working on until it's perfect. But we haven't got time for perfection. And I think perfection comes with progression anyway. So it is something that will happen. But I want to talk to you now, Stephanie. The future of sustainable innovation is increasingly being shaped by political risk. How can innovators build resilience? We've got a lot of innovators in this room. So when it comes to funding, research and regulation, how can they kind of build resilience in this deep political uncertainty at the moment?
First of all, I've spoken on, I think, 4 panels in the UK and EU since February. And as the American, I always get the political risk question. So I always like to tell people it's very safe to ask us about Trump. We are fine to talk about it. So,
Trump question is coming up.
It's coming up.
Don't you? I'm leaving that till the end.
So first of all, one thing I'd like to encourage people to remember is that we have 3 years, 5 months, and 2 weeks until it's over. So, and that might sound like a long time, but in the world of industries that, sometimes take 2 years to plan, something coming to market and all that, it will go faster than we all realize, and we will get through it. So that, one thing to keep in mind, and, we have to really, in these kind of industries, you're planning for very long term, right? So 4 years in the grand scheme will not disrupt what we're all trying to get to. But other recommendations I would have for innovators is, number one, keep it lean. I see a lot of innovators, for example, hiring business development people before their innovation is even ready to go to market. That's a waste of money. Just keep it as lean as you possibly can with your staff and your expenses. Second of all, if you're in your beginning phases, design to scale. At the very beginning for us, I've built a factory at a previous company that I owned, so I knew I wanted to try to not do that if at all humanly possible, for just the expense and the time and the complexity. So try to design in a way that you can fit into existing manufacturing techniques. So we brought on a manufacturing expert early in the R&D process to look at everything we were doing and say, okay, we could maybe do that on this type of equipment and stuff. So that would be another recommendation for innovators. And then really, I think the last one would be to avoid what I've recently been calling innovation tourism, meaning, there's a lot of brands that will come to you and want to learn a lot and want to get a lot of free samples and have a lot of meetings, but won't spend money, won't pay for samples, because what we've learned is that the brands that are willing to lean in, they're willing to write a check, they're willing to do an offtake agreement, they're willing to, commit, are the ones that are actually going to move forward. Otherwise, there is a lot of tourism in this industry of people who want to do something but aren't really fully committed to take the risk or to move forward and do some things. So
I like
some different
innovation
tips.
tourism. I like that because I feel that happens a lot in fashion.
Yeah.
I used to write about fashion tech for the last X amount of years, and that's one thing I did notice with a lot of great ideas. There was a lot of brands showing interest but not willing to put their money where their mouth is, right?
Can I just add on that
yes,
point?
go ahead, Abbie.
Because I love that, and as someone who has also sold to many brands, I would say make it easy for them as possible to know how you fit in to their strategy, because it's much easier to get something through if it fits neatly in. You can still get it in if it's something they didn't have planned, but that is much easier. And I think the other thing around it is a big part of when they are going to invest in these parts, and to do with the tourism part, is ultimately at the end of the day, what can I say about it? I think this is quite controversial potentially, but lots of people are saying, oh, well, brands just want to market sustainability. It's like, well, if they're marketing sustainability, it means they're investing in sustainability and they have something to talk about. Like at this point, if you're talking about sustainability today, you have to have credible stuff behind it to back it up. And so if your innovation is actually very easy to know what I can say based on investing in this material or this type of product, it's much easier for them internally to get buy-in because they understand the impact to the wider business and strategy. And I think trying to really get as close to that as possible early on makes that conversation easier. That's not even a guarantee at that point. They could still be just being the tourist. But I think if you can nail that, like, okay, through using our products, it does this. This is what you're going to be able to say to your customer at the end of the day, or say to your investors, depending on the output. I think that makes it somewhat
I
easier.
completely agree. I think you have to be fluent in the brand that you want to work with.
Yeah.
Understand who it is you want to work with so you can make sure that your idea fits in with their idea, because they're not going to do that. So it's up to you to do it. I completely agree. But I want to bring it to you, Melina. Among all this noise that we're hearing, not in the stage, but I mean in general, are there any signals of hope? Because it's very easy to kind of get caught up in what we're doing wrong or what we're not doing at all. So are there any signals of hope? What positive policy movements, however small, can you share with us today?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's happening. And going back to my point earlier, which was that our slogan for London Climate Action Week is, don't tell me climate action isn't happening, because there is too much amplification of the doom and gloom message. In an effort to get people active and conscious, we've tried to scare them into it. And actually what's happening is, yes, that there are political headwinds, there are economic headwinds in the US, but actually the real economy transition is continuing and it's accelerating. We do have a revolution in clean technologies. Innovation is widespread across every industry. So that is relentless and it's reshaping our economies, but there is a real disjoint, and the disjoint is between particular communities, fashion one, but it's symptomatic of any industry that you pick, whether it's agriculture for food systems, fashion, or whether it's technology. People tend to talk within their industry and they're not learning from across other industries. And I'm not from the fashion sector, but I have worked with companies for 30 years on industrial transition across the world. And we are actively, agilely looking at what is working in other parts of the world. So in terms of regulation, absolutely. What's coming out of Brussels is trend setting. The Chinese are picking it up. The Chinese are paying attention because the Chinese are actually very serious about having a green circular economic transition because they need it for political reasons. The textiles directives that we have, the packaging and waste directives, the European Union is absolutely leading the way. Of course, there's going to be a moment of course correction because you can't go so far ahead of industry. The industry pulls back and small and SMEs say, we're going to be bankrupted by the by the pace of legislation and regulation and all of the burden that you're putting on top of us. So make sure it's commensurate with where we are. That's why you get the response of the Italians. It's not just the Italians. This is a typical response from policymakers because SMEs in particular are screaming in pain. So you need to make sure you're calibrating your transition for your progressive policy and regulation transition. And it meets where companies are there and then. I think the thing that we are absolutely missing in this is, and I'll give you the analogy of agriculture. In agriculture, we tend to talk about farm to fork, and we miss everything in terms of that other bit, which is food waste. Okay, we know that food waste is accounting for 1/3 of global emissions right now, right? But we're equally missing what Tetra Pak calls the hidden middle. And that's everything that goes along the value chain with what you were describing, Amy, which is all of those intermediate actors. Your manufacturers, the industries which are in the middle need to be able to present their banks with a transition plan which shows that they are committed to the brand's sustainability agenda, but somebody is financing them to make their transition plan business worthy. And that is the bit that we don't have. So what I would say is, yes, there's a lot of good stuff happening. Let's lean into it. Let's make it go quicker. Yes, policy and regulation have always been the drivers. There's no, war between the mandatory or the voluntary approach. We know regulation works. Okay, that's why companies respond, and that's what we hear from companies in the UK. Please follow the European Union.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to stop you there for a second because I've only got a few minutes and I would love to hear from the other ladies. But before I ask the next question, QR code up there. If you do have any questions, please use it to share your question with us. We'll be doing that in the next 8 minutes. We'll be passing it on to you. I want to ask you, Amy, looking ahead, how might creative education and cross-sector collaboration unlock the change that we urgently need?
I think, I don't know if it will unlock the chain on its own. It's like all of these things, right? We need everything, you mentioned it right at the beginning, excuse me. There's not one single solution to these things, but collaboration I find really interesting. I collaborate quite a lot with different individuals, and I think first thing that people forget, people just sort of see the glossy, maybe kind of like Amy Powney X, whatever, and that's what we see in the media. But actually what we sort of miss is knowledge sharing from business perspective, sustainability perspective, creative perspective. I think actually working with other individuals in sectors, specifically if maybe you don't work that much in sustainability, you want to learn more about sustainability, if you partner with someone on a collaboration, I'm very, very pro collaboration because I've learned so much from different individuals, sometimes what not to do, as well as sometimes what to do. And I've made incredible connections from it too. So I think we can all learn off so much. And I think, especially when you're collaborating with people in senior positions, or I would work with another owner of a brand or an organization, they have the ability to then push that through. So if we can inspire them to change, they can push it through their organization. If they can inspire me or give me a different perspective on something, I can apply it to my business. And actually, really, I think collaboration and community are the main things from a grassroots level that we need to reinstate into this world to help us get together to make the change we need legislation for sure. We know that's the only way. I totally agree. But for the people power, I feel like we've become quite individualized in the way that society works. And I think collaboration and communication and community is so important. And then in terms of education, it's a similar narrative. I think we are talking to the future leaders. If we can get in at an early level and inspire them to make the change. I was actually having a conversation with someone recently. This is slightly digressing, but how my education as a white British person was about how pro-colonialism was, and I've had to undo that as an adult and rework all my history and rework out who I am, what I am, and how that happened. And actually, I think if we can teach children to be thinkers, innovators, problem solvers, sustainability advocates, if we can get that into them early on, I think that, we have so much more potential and power to change.
I think you make a really good point in terms of educating those who are going to inherit the industry. and also kind of unlearning, which is a very hard thing for anyone to do, especially if you're like a millennial or above. It's like unlearning is really, really difficult, but it's not impossible. I want to speak with you, Stephanie. You know I was going to do this, so we're going to talk Trump and tariffs. How can we keep that energy positive moving forward as an industry when we have Trump and tariff has us in their sights?
Right.
You know, how can we make that work?
Yeah, it's definitely can be challenging to stay positive around it. But I think that, you know, for us, like I'll give an example of what I did individually. So about a week after all the first round of tariffs came through, well, first of all, I immediately started Googling moving to Thailand. And so, but when I realized it was not realistic to move the whole company there. But I think then I started creating a list of like the pros and cons of the situation. And it was interesting as I kind of looked at the pros, for example, so my company, we're a leather alternative company, like a leather evolution. And one of the interesting advantages for us is that our supply chain is very short, right? Like I can set up factories in Europe, I can set up factories in any country, right? Because we use contract manufacturing, and so and then you know all our ingredients can be sourced in all the same regions. So whereas as opposed to like the leather supply chain, where a hide can be slaughtered, you know, a cow could be slaughtered in Brazil, that hide goes to Sri Lanka, then it goes on to Bangladesh, you know, all different types of processing, and then it ends up in Italy where it goes into something. I mean, we can take a 4-step process and turn it into a 1-step process. So I think there's lots of, you know, we can look at those kind of advantages. So I think it's kind of looking for those bright spots, you know, thinking about what we're facing, and I do think, for what it's worth, I mean, right now, you know, it's insane in America. Like it's hard to even describe what the environment feels like, but everybody is really banding together, and I think that a lot of this is going to calm back down. And you know, even in the courts, you know, things are getting challenged, and we're winning. We're protesting every weekend. I think that we're going to fight against this. So I think it'll work its way out. And it'll be hopefully a what doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of situation.
Sometimes it's got to get worse before it gets better.
Exactly. So
well, we're certainly patient-ish, so we can kind of like ride it out. I feel like all the information that you've offered here on stage does bring us back to COP30, which is what we want to kind of like end with. How many of you are going to COP30? Okay, we've got a couple.
Many.
How many of you are interested in going to COP30? Let me rework that sentence. Yeah. I mean, I think that fashion's voice could be louder in these rooms. I think it's missing a little bit. So I would love for you in like a minute to offer one action or one clear priority that companies or governments or even investors can commit to between now and COP30 to help transform fashion as a climate solution. I mean, what would that be? What kind of words of wisdom in your experience and how you view COP30, you know, what action can be taken between now and then? But feel free to go first, whoever wants to go first.
Can I put COP30 in context?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this is the 10th year of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which was agreed in 2015. So a lot has happened, and what we call the Paris Rule Book, the rules around how government should engage in carbon markets, everything around mitigation, adaptation, etc., all of that's been agreed. So we are now in a very different era, and the era is around implementation. So the Brazilian presidency has been emphasizing this word, mutirão, which means collective action. So they have fundamentally transformed their approach to a traditional COP by inviting everybody in to deliver on what you can in your constituency. And that's what we're doing here at London Climate Action Week. So if you're not going to go to Belém, that's fine, because it's very remote, it's difficult to reach, that's what we hear from a lot of people, and that's not where all of the action is going to be. Right after London Climate Action Week, we're going to be in Rio at the end of August. It's the fashion capital of Brazil. We're going to have parallel programming picking up on the ideas and the initiatives that have come out of London Climate Action Week. All of these multiplicity of discussions around fashion and finance, etc., going to move to Rio. So please come and join us at the end of August, because there you'll find a much larger community of people who are all about the collaboration, building community, building a sustainability field, working across sectors. So I would say that is the first thing that you can do. The second thing, from those of you who are in the UK, press your local MPs to find out about what is in their nationally determined contribution from the UK that affects their constituencies. Because these national climate plans are too far away. We need to bring them down to the local level, and that's the job of the MPs. So that's what I would urge you to do. Make sure fashion and textiles are on it. From those of you who are not from the UK, most of your governments, unless you're from the UAE and Brazil, have not really handed in your national climate plans. Make sure fashion is part of it. It's part of the industrial transition.
Okay. Would anyone want to add to what was said?
Yeah, I think
You've got like 2 more minutes.
I'm going to try and do this as briefly as possible. But
Yes,
I will
please.
say I do slightly disagree with some of the parts around the fact that like it's just to do with that we need to go a bit slower and faster. So I think I go a bit slower and meet people where they are. I think that it's a populist campaign. Look at this room. The solutions are there. The solutions on automating processes to keep those costs down are there. I know many founders within the climate tech space, and it's a populist narrative that the right are using to slow us down. And I think that they are making good headway at this moment in time. And the reason why they're making good headway is because they're organised. So to back to your question, I think the reason what we need to do is we need to get much better organised as an industry. I think the British Fashion Council and the CIFIN group did an excellent report. So if you are going to send an email to your MP, send that CIFIN report. It has literally a very clear rule book or playbook in the UK of what the fashion industry would like to call for. It's a broad agreement in terms of what do we need in the UK. And ahead of a COP, if you can't go yourself, try and come together with other creators to create a unified message and find people who are going to help you deliver that message. Try and align with other industries where you can, because we need to have a better united voice on this transition of what that looks like for us to start getting some of these things through. Because the only reason why these things are derailing, I mean, von der Leyen, the president, made it really clear at the beginning of the year, we're going to balance the ecological transition with competitiveness. If you look at the last 3.5 months, the executive are infighting, her own party are going against her quite publicly on the pace of this, and that is due to many factors. But I think the reality is the innovations are there, and it's not because we need to go slower for SMEs. And I think we need to just call a spade and get really, really smart with the amount of data we are all sitting on of what we need to do. And I think if we could do that better, we have a much better chance of just calling out, just about to swear, of calling out what is actually very just smoke and mirrors at this point.
I'm going to... So I know you've got a lot to say, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. You've given us a lot of good questions here, and I feel like I have to pick a favourite child. But I will start with Claudia, wherever you are, Claudia. She says, Stephanie, how do we combat innovation tourism as an innovator?
Well, the best thing that we've done is learn lessons really quickly. Like there was a brand that asked us to do a bunch of work, and we charged for our hard costs, but we didn't charge for any of our time to like do a bunch of custom different looks and thicknesses and colors and textures and all this. And then they ended up not going forward. And for me, that was like, I only had to learn that lesson once, So what so now we quote things out, the card costs, our time, and there's different creative things you can do where I'm like, if you commit to an order, then we won't charge that upfront fee or, that type of thing. But I think just really, being very particular about even just little things. Like we've learned if a brand won't pay for samples or at the minimum won't pay to ship the samples, our monthly postal costs are like $3,000 just to send out samples, right? And so I think that's something we've done is really, if they won't even like give you their UPS code, or like cover the smallest fees, they're probably not really, that very interested. They're not serious about this. So, or even worse, they're not going to understand. They're not willing to understand the challenges we face as like an 8-person company, So that's one of the things that we've done that's really helped.
I mean, I think you say some things that are really kind of probably resonate with a lot of people because you're always super excited to work with a big company. You don't want to say no.
Yeah.
But you do need to kind of lay your groundwork. Like, this is my limits and I
Right.
will not go past that.
Yeah.
There's another question here,
Yeah.
anonymous question. And they ask, what advice would you give a small or a startup company aiming to be sustainable on a limited budget while avoiding greenwashing? So if we can keep our answers to about a minute, who would like to take that question?
Well, can I please take this because I feel so strong about this topic?
Okay, go ahead. You've got a minute, Stephanie. Go
Mainly
for it.
because, you know, one thing that I would really encourage the entire industry to really give this some thought. You know, there's a lot of, somebody made the statement earlier, progress over perfection. But I'll tell you, as an innovator, we are 100% expected to be at absolute perfection. And, you know, there is just no, it's hard to describe. Like, for example, we will get these huge lists of questions from a brand when we just first engage. I'm talking hundreds of questions about our input ingredients, where they're sourcing from, all this different stuff. Even though at that point, like sometimes we're just buying things off Amazon, like like we're still just at a small scale. But so much scrutiny is put on us. But when I ask brands, hey, by the way, do you have your tanneries answer these same questions? And they're like, no. And so I'm like, why not? You know, so that I think it puts innovators in a very difficult situation where you almost can't, like, we're now at full scale, but I remember in our early days, like you didn't really want to talk too much about what you were doing, so because you were so afraid of the backlash because you weren't quite there yet, right? Like, for example, for a while we had 10% plastic in our material in the formulation. We were working everything we could to get it down. So yeah, there's just lots of scrutiny on us that I would, I think it would do the industry a lot of good if everybody would give us a little bit of a break and give us some time to get to perfection.
And can I just add into that, as a brand owner who is doing sustainability, I just think honesty is the best policy.
I
Yeah.
agree.
We once had a situation where our black organic denim actually turned out wasn't organic because the manufacturer lied to us. And when we chased for the certification, it wasn't. We had sustainable attributes on our site. We took it away, so we were clean and transparent that it wasn't. But then we just emailed all of our customers and we said, this has happened, but it would be more wasteful for us to throw all this denim in the bin. So our black denim this season isn't organic because of all these reasons. But I don't want to reject it because if I reject it, that stuff's going into landfill. Yeah. So I just think actually to be honest and tell that narrative and that story also I think builds trust with the customer because otherwise they're just expecting you're lying to them. Whereas if you're honest, that says actually if this person or this brand has gone out their way to tell us this bad thing that's happened and they're not hiding it, we could probably trust them.
It means that's what we tell our kids, right?
Yeah,
Tell mama the truth.
Exactly.
Because then we can trust what you say going forward. So I think honesty is scary, though, for fashion brands to be honest, because it's not in our natural DNA.
I think customers really like it.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a customer, I like it, but as a business, I understand the fear of being honest. Another question. Let's have a look. We have a really interesting one from Charles Ross, wherever you are in the crowd. He asks, on the back of my... Oh, let me go with this first question, actually. Little resource is used by textiles. For example, apparel is 1.5% of oil use and more microfiber pollution from tires than clothes. Are we too easy a victim? So I think he's kind of asking, like, is fashion being picked on when fashion is not the worst, doing the worst kind of
Can I just say
problems,
that
I guess?
right at the beginning of this, when you answered your very first question and why fashion wasn't on the agenda, because you said it was agriculture, travel, transport.
Not travel, road
Well,
transport.
sorry, yeah, but
Particular highly intensive industry.
Yeah, but the fashion is all of those things. We are only made, we're agriculture. We grow our food. We raise sheep for our wool. We grow our fibers. We raise sheep for our wool. We cut down trees. We take oil and we extract it. We transport it. We move it. We dye it. We finish it. We process it. We use energy at all times. Everything that is in the agenda, the reason fashion isn't specifically, it should be specifically outlined, but we are all of those things. And so actually, we're the biggest one of the biggest contributors because we contribute to all of those things.
So
Can we come back on the data point?
we've got 1 minute left. If you can say it in 30 seconds, you may. Go ahead.
I think Charles is a very important point because I do think that we need better data to help us understand actually what every industrial sector, which is linked in many different ways with lots of different raw material supply chains and commodity chains, actually its contribution is. and not just in terms of carbon, but in terms of other gases. And that's where agriculture is where we are bringing fashion together, especially on the natural fibers
Cotton,
front.
yeah.
Absolutely. Methane emissions, etc. How to have an integrated approach, but a better understanding starts with better, more reliable data. So I think Charles is right.
I think data is a big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's another panel right there, data. I think fashion needs to understand how to use it and how it can actually make them better. But I think they just don't know what to do with it. So I feel like I need to have a side conversation with you on data. Thank you everyone for coming. I just want to kind of like wrap up quickly. I've got 38 seconds. So we've talked about governance. We just mentioned data, design, and also innovation. But kind of underneath it all, there's one single idea, and that's the systems we live by can be redesigned, and that they must be as well. So not just for COP30, which is what we're about, but all for the people and the places and those lives that are stitched into the fabric of this industry. So I want to say thank you to our panelists. I think you've shared so much information, but I do feel a bit like you still had more to share.
Talk for hours.
I feel bad. It's like giving you only 30 minutes. We need an hour on stage, I think. And thank you to everyone for listening and being patient with us. And if your question wasn't answered, do feel free to approach the ladies. They don't bite. I'm sure you're happy to answer any questions on a one-to-one basis. Thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon.